sister-in-law was standing in my kitchen holding the spare key I had given her 3 years ago in case of emergencies when she told me I had until Sunday to get out. Not her kitchen. Mine. The one I had scrubbed on my hands and knees every Saturday morning for 4 years. The one where I had learned to make my mother-in-law's pot roast recipe from scratch because I thought it would make her love me. The one where I had cried alone at 2 in the morning more times than I could count, wondering why no matter what I did, I was never quite enough for this family. She said it so casually, like she was telling me the weather. Sunday. We need the space. I remember staring at the key in her hand. The little yellow sunflower keychain I had picked out because it made me smile. She was dangling it like it meant nothing, like I meant nothing. I did not cry. I did not argue. I just nodded and said okay, because that is what 4 years in that family had trained me to do. Say okay, shrink. Disappear a little more each time. What she did not know, what none of them knew, was that 72 hours later, a wire transfer for $29 million would land in an account with only my name on it. And my phone would not stop ringing for a week. I need to back up because none of this makes sense without the beginning. I met my husband the summer after I finished nursing school. He was kind then, genuinely warmly kind, the type of man who remembered how you took your coffee and held doors open, not because someone was watching, but because it was just who he was, or who I thought he was. Looking back now, I understand I was mostly in love with potential, with the version of him that existed only when we were alone and away from his family. The moment we got engaged, something shifted. Like a light switch, subtle at first, then impossible to ignore. His mother started calling 3 times a day. His sisters started showing up unannounced. His family's opinions began flowing into every decision we made, where we would live, how we would spend holidays, whether I should keep working after we married. I kept waiting for my husband to draw a line. He never did. He smiled and nodded, and later, in private, told me I was being too sensitive. I was a nurse. I worked 12-hour shifts. I came home exhausted and still somehow managed to be the person who organized every family gathering, sent every birthday card, remembered every dietary restriction at every dinner. I thought if I just worked hard enough, gave enough, showed up enough, eventually they would accept me. His sister had other plans. She was 4 years older than him and had appointed herself the family's unofficial general. She decided who mattered and who did not. She had decided about me before I ever walked through the door, I think. She smiled to my face and whispered behind my back. She told my mother-in-law I was careless with money, which was ironic, given that I was the only one in that household with a consistent paycheck. She told my husband I seemed distant, emotionally unavailable. She planted seeds so carefully and patiently that by year 3 of our marriage, I could feel my husband starting to see me through her eyes instead of his own. My mother-in-law was not cruel in an obvious way. She was cruel in the soft, deniable way that leaves no marks. A sigh when she looked at my cooking. A comment about how her son seemed tired lately, directed at me like an accusation. A story at the dinner table about a woman from her church whose husband had left her, eyes sliding to me just a half-second too long. She loved her son in a consuming, airless way that left no room for anyone else to love him too, and she had never forgiven me for trying. By year 4, I had stopped trying to explain myself. I had stopped defending myself. I had gone quiet in the way that people go quiet when they have learned that speaking only makes things worse. My husband and I had moved into a house his grandmother had left him in her will. A small craftsman on a quiet street in North Carolina. It was the one place I had felt something close to stability, even if the air inside it had grown cold. I had painted the front door yellow. I had planted tomatoes in the side yard. I had made it a home the way women do when they are desperately trying to hold something together with their bare hands. Then his grandmother's older sister, a woman named Miss Elspeth, whom I had met exactly 4 times, passed away at 91. I had sat with her at the hospital during her final weeks because her own family visited inconsistently and the staff were stretched thin. I was a nurse. It was not a calculated act of kindness. It was just what I did. I brought her books. I fixed her pillows. I held her hand during the hard nights. We talked. She was sharp and funny and completely unimpressed by her own family's drama, which she described with the dry precision of someone who had been watching the same play for 70 years. I did not know she had changed her will. I did not know until the attorney called my cell phone on a Tuesday afternoon while I was eating a sandwich in my car between shifts. Miss Elspeth had left me her property in coastal South Carolina, a 3-acre lot with a restored farmhouse and a separate cottage, appraised. The attorney said this part carefully, like he was bracing for my reaction, at approximately $29 million. I sat in my car for a long time after I hung up. I thought about telling my husband that night. I actually had the words ready. But when I got home, he was on the phone with his sister, and he held up one finger at me like I was interrupting something important. And I stood in the kitchen I had scrubbed 100 times, and I felt something very quiet and very certain settle in my chest. I did not tell him. I called the attorney back the next morning from the hospital parking garage and asked him how quickly we could keep this private. I had been quietly seeing a therapist for 8 months by that point. Her name was Dr. Webb, and she had this way of asking questions that made you realize you had known the answer for a long time, and had just been too frightened to say it out loud. She was the one who first said the word isolated to me in a clinical context. She said, "You have been systematically isolated from your own instincts by people who benefit from your self-doubt." I had nodded and then cried in my car for 20 minutes. After the call with the attorney, I called her. I told her what had happened. She said, "What do you want to do? Not, what should you do? Not, what is the right thing? What do you want to do?" I wanted to protect myself. For once in 4 years, I wanted to protect myself first. I contacted a family law attorney named Mr. Forsythe the following week. I did not use the family's lawyer, the one who had handled the grandmother's estate and who my mother-in-law called by his first name like an old friend. I found someone outside the network, someone no one in my husband's family had ever heard of, and I told him everything. He told me what I needed to know. I listened. I started making careful, quiet preparations. I want to be honest about this part because I think people sometimes imagine that women in situations like mine are playing chess while everyone else plays checkers. That is not what it was. I was terrified. I second-guessed myself every single day. I still brought his mother a casserole for her birthday because I did not know how to stop performing normalcy. I still smiled at his sister over dinner while she told a story that was quietly, obviously designed to humiliate me. I was not strategic. I was just scared and exhausted, and I had finally found one thing, one solid, real thing, that was entirely mine, and I was not going to let them take it. The information spread faster than I expected. I had told no one, but Miss Elspeth's estate had to go through probate, which means paperwork, which means the kind of small-town legal gossip that travels through certain circles like smoke through a screen door. Someone knew someone who knew my mother-in-law's neighbor. That is my best understanding of how it happened. Within 6 weeks of my phone call with the attorney, my sister-in-law was standing in my kitchen with my sunflower keychain. She said they needed the space. My husband, standing behind her, did not look at me directly. I had learned by then that when he could not look at me, it was because he had already had a conversation with his family that he had not had with me yet. He had the expression of a man who had been told what to do and was hoping I would make it easy. I said okay. I said I would be out by Sunday. She laughed. He mumbled something about things being complicated right now. I said I understood. I went to bed. I lay there in the dark and I thought, they have no idea. I was out by Friday. I did not make a scene. I did not leave a mess. I packed the things that were mine. My grandmother's quilt, my nursing licenses and certificates, the small jade plant I'd been keeping alive on the bathroom windowsill for 3 years. I left the pot roast recipe card on the kitchen counter because I wanted her to find it. I wanted her to understand that I had learned their recipes and cleaned their house and shown up at every single holiday, and it still was not enough. And I was done pretending that was my failure. I drove to South Carolina. The farmhouse was more beautiful than the photographs. White clapboard siding, wide front porch, live oaks with Spanish moss hanging in long silver curtains over the driveway. The cottage behind it had been recently renovated. Miss Elspeth had overseen the work herself in her late 80s, which told me everything I needed to know about the kind of woman she was. The view from the back porch was 3 acres of low country marsh, gold in the late afternoon light, absolutely quiet except for the birds. I sat on that porch and I cried. Not sad crying. The other kind. The kind that surprises you because you suddenly realize how long you've been holding your breath. I changed the locks on both structures that weekend. I contacted the attorney on Monday. I filed the paperwork on Wednesday. By Thursday, my phone had 31 missed calls. By Saturday, it was 58. My husband called 11 times in one afternoon. His first messages were careful and measured. "I think we should talk, there seems to be some confusion," and then progressively less measured as the hours passed. His sister called 4 times and left one voicemail that I will not repeat verbatim, but which contained the phrase, "You owe this family," delivered at a volume that required me to hold the phone away from my ear. My mother-in-law called once. She did not leave a message, but the call lasted 4 seconds, which means she dialed, heard my voicemail greeting, and hung up. I found myself wondering if she had expected someone else to answer, if she had pictured me sitting somewhere waiting for her call, relieved to finally be summoned back. I did not call any of them back. I called Mr. Forsyth instead. Here is what people do not understand about situations like mine. They think the hardest part is leaving. It is not. The hardest part is what comes after, when the silence gives you room to hear every story you have been telling yourself for years. The one where you were too difficult, too sensitive, not quite lovable enough, not quite enough in general. Those stories are stubborn. They do not dissolve just because you have a porch and a view and $29 million in assets. They follow you into the kitchen at 6 in the morning and sit with you whilst coffee brews. Dr. Osei Webb drove down 2 weekends after I moved in. She said she wanted to see the place, which I knew was only partially true. She sat across from me on the front porch and let me talk for 2 hours, and then she said, "What does it feel like to have made this choice?" I thought about it for a while. Then I said, like I finally turned a light on in a room I had been navigating in the dark for years. She nodded. That is exactly what boundaries do. I had to sit with that for a long time. The legal process was not quick. I want to be honest about that too, because the tidy version of the story would suggest that paperwork filed equals problem solved, and that is simply not how it works. There were counterfilings. There were claims made about the property that my attorney had to address one by one. My husband's family retained their own counsel, a decision that surprised me with how quickly it happened, which told me they had been anticipating this longer than I had realized. My husband claimed that because we were still legally married, he had an interest in the inherited asset. Mr. Forsyth explained to me very patiently that in North Carolina, and given the specific language of Miss Elspeth's will and the timing of the inheritance, this argument faced significant challenges. I listened. I trusted the process. What I was not prepared for was my sister-in-law's involvement in the legal proceedings. She had convinced my husband to claim that Miss Elspeth had lacked full mental capacity when she rewrote her will. That she had been confused, manipulated. That I had manipulated her. I had spent the last weeks of an old woman's life, sitting with her at 2 in the morning, when she was frightened and uncomfortable, reading her Agatha Christie novels out loud because she said they helped her feel like herself. The idea that this constituted manipulation was the kind of claim that made me feel a cold, clean anger I had not known I was capable of. My attorney was thorough. The hospital had records. The staff had observations. Miss Elspeth's own physician submitted a statement. She had been entirely, sharply lucid until 2 weeks before her death. She had told her physician she was changing her will because she had, in her words, watched a kind young woman pour grace into a graceless situation for 4 years, and it deserved to be rewarded. That statement became central to the proceedings. The undue influence claim was dismissed. My husband, facing a case that was not going the direction his family had promised, eventually agreed to mediation. His sister attended the first session and spoke so aggressively that the mediator asked her to leave. She did not leave quietly. I watched my husband watch his sister get escorted out of a conference room, and I saw something cross his face that I recognized. The expression of someone realizing, perhaps for the first time, what the people who love you look like from the outside. He did not say anything to me about it. But the case settled shortly after. I will tell you about the settlement because I think people often imagine this part as triumphant. It was not triumphant. It was quiet and sad in a way I had not expected. He got nothing from the estate. Miss Elspeth had been explicit in her language, and the dismissal of the undue influence claim had effectively closed every avenue his attorneys had constructed. He retained his grandmother's house, the craftsman with the yellow front door, which I had asked for nothing from because I was done trying to hold on to things that had never really been mine. He called me once after the paperwork was finalized. He did not apologize. He said he hoped I knew that things had not been supposed to go this way. I said I understood. I meant it. I think he had started out as the man I had fallen in love with and had simply never developed the particular courage it takes to stand between the people who raised you and the person you chose. That is a real failure. It just is not mine to carry anymore. I hung up and sat on the porch and watched the marsh go golden in the late afternoon light, and I did not feel the satisfaction people expect me to describe. I felt released. My mother-in-law called one more time, 8 months after everything was finalized. My sister-in-law had sent me an email the previous month, carefully worded, no actual acknowledgement of anything specific, asking if we might have coffee the next time I was in North Carolina. I had not responded. My mother-in-law's call, I answered because I was curious. She said she wanted me to know that she had always thought of me as family. That family makes mistakes, that she hoped I would leave room in my heart for reconciliation. I listened. I waited until she finished. Then I said, as gently and as firmly as I knew how, I think we have different understandings of what family means. I hope you take good care. I ended the call. I put the phone down on the porch railing. A great blue heron was standing at the edge of the marsh about 30 feet out, completely still, absolutely uninterested in anything happening behind it. I watched it for a long time. I did not call back. I have not called back. The farmhouse is different now. The front porch has a swing I bought at an estate sale and spent a Saturday painting the right shade of cream. The side yard has an herb garden and 2 raised vegetable beds and 1 deeply unruly rosemary bush that I keep meaning to trim and never do. The cottage in the back is currently home to 2 travel nurses from the hospital system, 30 minutes north, women in their 20s doing their first contract assignments, working long shifts, eating cereal for dinner because they are too tired to cook. I charge them below market rate because I remember being them, and because Miss Elspeth would have approved. I still work. People always find this surprising, as if the money should have changed what I am. But I am a nurse. I am a nurse the way some people are teachers or carpenters, not because I had no other options, but because it is the truest version of myself I have found. I work 3 days a week now instead of 5. I sleep better. I have time to read in the evenings. I have started to learn what my own preferences are, separate from everyone else's, which is a stranger process than I expected for a 31-year-old woman who thought she already knew herself. Dr. Oseweb and I still meet every other week via video call. She would say I have done the work. I would say she gave me the language to do it. We are probably both right. The thing I come back to, the thing I think is worth saying clearly is this: I was not thrown out of a family. I was thrown out of an arrangement that called itself a family. An arrangement in which my role was to absorb, to accommodate, to produce warmth on demand and ask for nothing in return. When I stopped being useful to that arrangement, the arrangement discarded me. That is not family. That is something else entirely. Real family is the friend who called every 3 days during the legal proceedings just to check if I had eaten. It is the colleague who drove 4 hours to help me move furniture into the farmhouse and would not accept a cent for gas. It is the 91-year-old woman who sat up in a hospital bed in the middle of the night and told me I was worth more than I was being paid in that house, and I should not forget it. It is not automatic. It is chosen. And it has to be chosen on both sides. I chose myself. That is where it started. Everything else followed from that. If you are somewhere tonight performing okayness for people who have stopped noticing whether you are okay, I want you to hear this. The quiet, steady accumulation of smallness that comes from living inside someone else's version of who you should be is not sustainable. Not forever. At some point, the weight of it becomes visible even to you, and when that happens, when you finally see it clearly, you will have a choice. You are allowed to choose yourself. You are allowed to stop explaining. You are allowed to pick up your jade plant and your grandmother's quilt and walk out the door and not look back, even if your hands are shaking when you do it. The heron was still at the edge of the marsh when I went inside that night, standing like it had always been there. Like stillness was not something it had learned. but something it simply was. I think about that sometimes. What it would feel like to be that still inside my own life. I am getting there, slowly. But I am getting there. If this story reached something in you, leave a comment below. I read every single one. Tell me about a moment when you finally chose yourself. And if you are still in the middle of it, still figuring out where the door is, subscribe and stay. You are not as alone in this as it feels right now, I promise. I have thought a lot about Miss Elspeth lately. Not about the property or the will or what any of it set in motion legally. Just about her. The way she held her paperback with both hands even when her grip was weakening, the way she laughed at the parts of Agatha Christie that were not supposed to be funny, because she had lived long enough to find the dark parts of stories more honest than the tidy ones. She told me once, somewhere around 2 in the morning when neither of us could sleep, that the cruelest thing a person can do to someone who loves them is teach them that love requires silence. I did not fully understand what she meant at the time. I do now. What happened to me was not a single event. It was an accumulation. It was 4 years of small compressions, a sigh here, a dismissal there, a door opened and a door quietly shut, until I had learned to take up less and less space in my own life. Nobody sat me down and said, "Become smaller." It happened the way most damage happens, gradually and then all at once, until one day, a woman is standing in your kitchen holding your sunflower keychain and telling you to leave by Sunday, and some part of you thinks, okay, that is fair. That part of me was wrong. And learning that, really learning it, not just intellectually accepting it but feeling it settle into your bones, that is the actual work. The property was not the turning point. The decision to protect it was. There is a difference between having something and believing you deserve to keep it. I think about my husband sometimes. Not with anger anymore, mostly with a kind of sad clarity. He was not a villain. He was a man who never developed the specific courage it takes to disappoint the people who raised you on behalf of the person you chose. That is a real failure of character, and it is also a failure that he will have to reckon with in his own time, in his own way. I cannot carry that for him. I tried for 4 years and it nearly disappeared me entirely. His sister made her choices out of fear, I think. Fear of losing her position, fear of what it would mean if her brother's life expanded beyond the borders she had drawn around it. Fear dressed up as authority is still just fear. The consequences she is living with now are not punishment. They are just the natural result of treating other people as obstacles to manage rather than human beings to respect. And my mother-in-law, with her 1 4-second phone call and her later overture about reconciliation, I do not wish her harm. I simply will not let her rewrite history to make herself comfortable in it. That is not bitterness. That is just honesty, and I have learned that honesty and cruelty are not the same thing even when they feel similar to the person receiving them. What Dr. Osei-Webb helped me understand over many months and many honest conversations is that integrity is not a reward you receive after you have survived something. It is the thing you practice in the middle of it. Every time I chose not to lie, not to retaliate carelessly, not to let my pain make my decisions, that was integrity. It was quiet and unglamorous, and nobody was watching. But it was mine. The marsh outside my back porch does not care about any of this. The heron does not care. The rosemary bush I keep meaning to trim does not care. And there is something genuinely clarifying about living alongside things that simply exist without performing. I am learning to do that too. To simply exist inside my own life without constantly auditioning for my place in it. That is what I want you to hear. If you are somewhere tonight in the middle of your own accumulation of small compressions, not that it gets easy, not that a wire transfer fixes anything inside you, but that the moment you stop arranging yourself around other people's comfort and start asking what you actually need, that moment is available to you. Right now. Before anything external changes. That is where it starts. It started there for me. Everything else just followed.